So Manya is ready.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us what is Kamala Hassan's on patriarchy.
Ma'am, should I just give an overview or should I also discuss it in a bit detail?
I think overview will work because everybody should have read it.
Okay, ma'am. Um, so Kamala Bhasin's work titled "What is Patriarchy?" It rearranges the understanding of patriarchy in a systematic way. Uh, she has tried to assign reasons as to why this system of patriarchy has survived and is still surviving in this world. And she does so by not only talking about what patriarchy is in the present system and how it affects us, but also taking also talking about the origins of patriarchy. In this work, she has focused on patriarchy in South Asia and has tried to open a space for further readings. Whatever she mentions is pretty brief, but makes the reader curious so that the reader themselves would investigate more into the matter. So she has divided. So her work is divided into two parts. One is what is patriarchy, and the other is the origins of patriarchy. And she does this in a question answer form. So she starts with talking about what is patriarchy. What does patriarchy mean literally, um, which uh, after that she talks about how we recognize patriarchy in our lives, as to how does patriarchy actually manifest itself. So she, in this particular question, she builds patriarchy not just prevalent as certain examples, but as a system, how it is prevalent in our society. So when she says that what we are up against is a system of male domination and superiority, of male control, in which women are subordinate, and not just about some vicious men who exploit or oppress some women. I think that in itself is sufficient to understand that patriarchy is a system, that to an institutionalized and a systematic system. I mean, it's a system, so it has to be systematic. So apologies for that. She mentions, she gives various examples, I think, with which all of us relate. For example, son preference, burden of household work on women and young girls, lack of educational opportunities, which is not very much prevalent now. But then this article was written in 1993, so we have moved a little ahead, at least from 1993. Then male control over women and girls, and such examples. Then from there, so what she has done is she has presented this whole what is patriarchy in a very, very systematic way, as to every question is following from the previous one. So it kind of creates a very structured image in our minds when we are reading this article. And that, to me, that kind of opened my mind, because that is how I could answer the whys behind everything that is prevalent. So the next question that she asks is, that does the term patriarchy then sums up the kind of male domination we see around? And here she mentions Juliet Michel, who is a feminist psychologist, according to whom patriarchy is a symbolic power which is responsible for inferiorized psychology of women. So this term, inferiorized psychology of women, again, we tend to talk about it, but where is it flowing from? It's somewhere it has been answered through this structured presentation in this article. Then she talks about, is patriarchy the same everywhere? So here also, like, men are in control, but the nature of this control may differ. And then she mentions about various examples. For example, tribal women, and it is different for it is different temporally, sectorally, and everywhere, and regionally, and in various other ways. So that is what she presents here. That patriarchy is present everywhere, but it differs in forms. Then she talks about what is it that men control in a patriarchal system. So to me, this part was very important, uh, because then she links it with the institutions, like the various institutions in which patriarchy is prevalent. So to talk about what exactly men control, or what exactly comes under patriarchal control, that becomes very important to understand. And uh, gives she gives pointers, like she says, she gives 5 points. One is women's productive or labor power. Second is women's reproduction. Third, control over women's sexuality. Fourth, women's mobility. Fifth, property and other economic resources. So these are not so. So as we will see towards in later in the article, that there is a whole debate as to whether patriarchy is in economic systems, or is it only the the men and women differences. So this kind of sets are it gives a pretext to understanding that it is patriarchy does not just control women, like because if we don't read it in an exhaustive manner or try to read it academically, we will think that patriarchy in simple terms is domination of man over woman. But it characterizes it, like this article characterizes it, which gives which again tries to answer all the whys, the unanswered whys. So one of the UN statistics which I would like to mention here is that women do more than 60% of the hours of work done in the world, but they get 10% of the world's income and own 1% of the world's property. So that is something to think about. Then she moves on to, as I said, the main institutions in society that shows that they're all patriarchal in nature. So she talks about family, religion, legal system, economic system, and economic institutions, political systems and institutions, media, educational institutions, and knowledge systems. So she says that patriarchy is so deep rooted and well knitted that this system looks like invincible and natural. So when we read about patriarchy in a family system or religion or legal system and all that I've mentioned, these 7 points, uh, when we read about it, it looks that patriarchy flows very naturally, and that is the whole the consequence or the effect of patriarchy, that we've all accepted it in almost every sphere of our lives. Then she speaks about does fem- don't fem- some feminists believe that there is an institutionalized violence against women in many societies. So she answers this by quoting Sylvia Walby, who calls male violence a structure which is systematic and institutionalized. So violence against women is so pervasive that it has become a structure. Then she talks about, can we say that male control over all the institutions benefits them directly? So, as we have said, that patriarchy is a system, but a system can only sustain if there is some reason that we want it to sustain. For example, feudalism couldn't sustain because none of us wanted it. By none of us, I mean both the parties who were getting benefited and the ones who were being oppressed. Somewhere the revolution came because none of them wanted it. But patriarchy is still sustaining, which means that there is some force which wants it to sustain. And she mentions it by saying that patriarchy has a material basis, and she again quotes Sylvia Walby by saying women are the producing class and men are the expropriating class. So till this material basis will so basically this material basis is fueling the whole system of patriarchy. Then she speaks about, are women completely powerless in patriarchal systems? And she makes references to a capitalist systems, that workers are important there also, but this doesn't mean that they're all equal. So no unequal system can continue without the participation of the oppressed, some of whom derive some benefits from it. So even if we again talk about the whole British Raj, it wasn't that all Indians were the oppressed ones. Some of them were benefiting also from the whole system, but that does not mean that they were equal to the British. Similarly, this whole system of patriarchy, that yes, some women do benefit from this, system. But so to say that they are all completely powerless, that would be incorrect. However, then in the very next segment, she answers that problem is not with what women do or are, it is with how they are valued and who has the right to assign value to to people. So when we are saying that women are not completely powerless, but they're deriving their power at the mercy of those at the top, and these are men. So to say that they are not powerless or powerful, but that has a clear connection with where they are deriving this power from, and that sanction they are getting from males. So again, it falls very well within the system of patriarchy. Then the next in the next segment, but women also support the rule of men. Without their cooperation, patriarchy would not exist. Why do they do this? um, Women, so in this she answers, women have always shared the class privileges of men of their class. So it is important when we're talking about class privileges to keep into our minds that we're not talking about women of lower class. It is talking about, very clearly talking about class privileges of men of their class, as long as they were under the protection of a man. Again, protection of man is important. So if we talk about the era where um, women used to write books uh, about women, about so if even if they were allowed to write, but that was just one freedom they were getting. They were still under protection of men. So uh, so Bhasin has called it reciprocal agreement, that they are giving this, so they are getting this freedom in exchange for your sexual, economic, political, and intellectual subordination. So you're letting yourself subordinated in some areas just to get some certain freedom. So it is a kind of a reciprocal agreement. Uh, there is one paragraph that I would like to quote, which answered to me personally. It answered a very important question. That we all know that women also are a part of patriarchy. They also end up treating sons better than their daughters. They also are against their daughters studying, and they don't treat their daughter-in-laws better in a good way. So we all know that patriarchy is somewhere behind this. But this quote kind of reflected, in howsoever wrong or cringeworthy it might be, but it kind of reflects on this whole notion that women have. So it says, it goes as, a rural woman explained this very graphically. She said, men in our families are like the sun. They have the light of their own. They own resources, have income, they are mobile, have the freedom to take decisions, etc. Women are like satellites without any light of their own. They shine only if and when the sun's light touches them. This is why women have to constantly compete with each other to have a bigger share of sunlight, because without this light, there is no life. From there, she moves to, do all men benefit as men from patriarchy? So she answers this both as a yes and a no. Yes, because men do get privileges. No, because they are also stereotyped, as stereotyped as in uh, the the roles that they have. That they cannot be emotional, they cannot be homemakers. We stereotype them also, and they lose on that. But the catch here is that Bhasin very to me it mattered a lot, because she says that, but this dehumanization can in no way be compared to or equated with the subordination of women, for two important reasons. Men do not as a whole experience it as such, and they are not discriminated against or disabled substantially because of it. So my understanding of it was that these yes and no both coexist. There is no separate yes or a separate no, they coexist. And hence, to say that a man does not experience such exploitation or oppression in totality, I think it makes all the sense. Then what about matriarchal societies or communities like the Nayars in Kerala? Again, she distinguishes between matriarchy on one hand and matrilineal and matrilocal on the other. So she says that Nayars in Kerala are matrilineal and matrilocal societies, but not matriarchal. In fact, she goes on saying that there is no matriarchal society that exists in the world or had existed in the world, for a simple reason that there had always been male domination in some form or the other. But she also says that in matrilineal or matrilocal societies, the situation of women is better than in patriarchal or patrilineal and patrilocal societies. Uh, then she goes on discussing that. So the next question is, nevertheless, you seem to be implying that patriarchy has become more powerful in, say, the last 100 years or so. Is this so? So here she quotes Sylvia Walby, wherein she says patriarchy is not a historical constant. Modifications in gender relation over the last century or so have been interpreted variously as progress, regress, and involving no overall change. Liberals typically define them as progress, Marxists as regress followed by status, and radical feminists as embracing no significant change. So from here, she very fluidly flows to the origins of patriarchy. So now that we have discussed what is patriarchy and what are the notions of patriarchy, how patriarchy is manifested in the whole system, then she moves on to the origin of patriarchy, where she discusses various feminists and various theories that back the explanation. Because as we all know, there is no one strict history as to how patriarchy evolved. So she gives some explanations. She very categorically writes that these are only some explanations. So the first point is so in the first question, she discusses whether has patriarchy always existed. Now this question is important because she discusses that if patriarchy always existed, then it is difficult to come out of it. But if it had an origin, if there is a point where we can say that it originated, then there can also be a point that where it can end. So this whole discussion, she starts this discussion with this, and then she talks about the traditionalist view of patriarchy, according to which it is biologically determined. So the traditionalist view is that patriarchy is universal and natural. Why? Because patriarchy is biologically determined, that man is more powerful, man is superior to women, and that's why patriarchy is universal and natural. Natural because we cannot change the biology. Hence, uh, this is the whole traditionalist view of patriarchy. Then she talks about uh, there are various other points, like she quotes Aristotle, she quotes Sigmund Freud. But as ma'am said, that since we are assuming that everyone has read the article, so I will not discuss that. Next, she comes to which theories deny the universality of female subordination and explore the origin of patriarchy. In this, she discusses three theories. Um, so she says an understanding of the origins of patriarchy is essential to challenge it and envisage a society without sexual hierarchy. So to me, this statement is important as to why it is important to understand the origin of patriarchy. As she mentioned in the last question, that if we can trace the origin, then we can also try to end it. And if we can understand the origin, then we can actually get a reasoning as to why we need to challenge it, and hence this explanation follows. So the first explanation is the angel's explanation of the origin of patriarchy, according to whom subordination began with the development of private property. And very briefly, that is the gist of angel's explanation, that there was private property, and he goes on to explain it historically. But the gist is that yes, there was private property, and that gave man the sense of entitlement, and that became the whole origin of patriarchy. There's another point which has to be mentioned, I think, which I forgot to mention, is that there is no one point of origin. There is a series of events that led to the origin of patriarchy. There's no single point which can be said that this is where patriarchy originated. So, and this becomes relevant because when we are talking about private property, it did not develop with one single event. It happened. So the whole argument of man the hunter, that came into picture. Man the hunter model. So that explains the whole angelic model, or so to say, angel's explanation of the origin of patriarchy. Second, she talks about the radical feminists and the revolutionary feminist explanations, according to whom, so the radical feminists have various explanations. First being, patriarchy preceded private property, which means private property is not the cause of patriarchy, and it is not derived from private property. Patriarchy existed even before private property came into picture, and they believe that the original and basic contradiction is between the sexes and not between economic classes. So where Angel, according to Angel, it was just about economic classes. Radical feminists says that it is about the sexes and not the economic classes. So the whole production, and so where they mention that there are two systems of social classes. The first being economic class system, which is based on the relation of production, and second is the sex class system, which is based on the system of reproduction. According to the radical feminists, it's the second which matters. It's the second which has led to the concept of patriarchy. Then there are other reasonings. For example, men's ability to rape them. So and that is why women have been subordinate. Then another explanation goes on saying that men cannot reproduce, men cannot procreate children, and that kind of gave them. One second. I think I just lost that point, but there is a mention of this particular point also, where men cannot procreate, and hence they have this. I'm forgetting the reasoning behind it. Apologies for that. But the criticism. So what radical feminism has not yet done is provide an account of the underlying causes of the patriarchal system. Why have men built these institutions, and why do they maintain them? That is the criticism of the whole radical feminist theory. Third is the socialist feminist position, on which Kamala she discusses socialist feminist position in greater detail, and one of the reasons for that is that is the most prevalent one, specifically in Indian context, as I'd already mentioned in the introduction, that she focuses on South Asia, patriarchy in South Asia. So she talks about socialist feminist in great detail, wherein she starts by saying that Marxist and radical feminist positions are both to be combined, because both of them have something to contribute, but neither is sufficient by itself. So we need a combination of whatever we have just discussed. So there has to be emphasis which has to be given to modes of production also, and also the fact that the whole reproduction argument. So we have to take into account both the arguments. So according to them, a patriarchy is related to the economic system, to the relations of production, but it is not casually related. There are several factors that play a very important role in strengthening it. She then, in the next question discusses it in greater detail, wherein she discusses different schools of thoughts among socialist feminists, and she discusses various socialist feminists and their ideas. So first she talks about Zilla Eisenstein, who's a socialist feminist scholar, and who says that one concern is how to formulate the problem of women as both mother and worker, reproducer and producer. Ma'am, should I go into all these theories? Hello? Hello?
I didn't realize I was on mute.
Ma'am, should I go into the
I'm saying up to you. I'm saying up to you.
Okay, ma'am.
What do others? No, first let's check with the others. Has everyone read it?
Yes, ma'am. We've read it.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, but I think Manya is doing a very good job of this summary. You know, this is the overview. We don't need a detail. It's very comprehensive. So I think let's just finish it.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
So I'll just go with the summaries then of all these arguments.
Yeah.
So I was talking about Zilla Eisenstein, according to whom patriarchy is not a direct growth of biological differentiation. It results from the ideological and political interpretations of differentiation. So there's a whole paragraph on page 54 of the case material of that PDF, which can be referred here. Then the next is the next theorist is Heidi Hartman, according to whom there's a link between patriarchy and capitalism, and argues that patriarchy links all men to each other irrespective of their class. So a woman's work benefits both capital and her husband, and this is one point where I realized that women as wives, you know, their role with their husband and not just someone who is procreating. So this is one feminist theory which actually brings into the so every other theory has inherent in it uh, that 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 the role of a woman is also to be a wife, but this explicitly brings it out. So it says that Hartman defines patriarchy as a set of relations which has a material base and in which there are hierarchical relations between men and solidarity among them, which in turn enable them to dominate women. Next is Maria Mais, who says whatever the ideological differences between the various feminist groups, they are united in their rebellion against this hierarchical relationship between men and women, which no longer accepted as biological destiny. So I think we are moving towards a more fluid concept of the whole this biological because earlier if we see the traditionalist argument, it is more of it blatantly says that it is biologically determined, but now when if you read Maria Mais, she actually says that it is the whole system. There is a hierarchy and it's not just the biological destiny. There are other explanations to it. There are other inequalities and asymmetry in the system which leads to this whole system of patriarchy. uh, the search so the search for the social origins of this relationship is part of the political strategy of women's emancipation. That's just one part I just quoted from the text. So Mice says that there have been biologistic biases in the earlier explanation given for sex hierarchy, and they need to be thoroughly understood and discarded. So after reading Moira Gatens, I think this made a lot sense to me personally. So there are other questions that Mize does not ask. When did the division of labor arise between men and women? But what she asks is, how did this division of labor became a relationship of dominance and exploitation, and why did this relationship become asymmetric and hierarchical? So that's how. So she is more into answering whys rather than, because we're talking about the origin of patriarchy. So she is now moving ahead from when to whys. Then there is a whole discussion on capitalist perspective as well. And then another argument is that it is the destructive tools that made man dominate every other form, not just women, but it started with animals. So it is the destructive weapons which, so there is this, she has quoted, without tools, man is no man, and the last man is in capitalism, which implies domination. And then she says to say that female productivity then is the precondition of male productivity. Why? Because women are the producers of new women and men. Without women, no man or woman will exist. So they are, so their productivity is a precondition for male productivity. I think that's where the whole concept of, I think I said it earlier, the whole concept that men cannot produce and female productivity is a precondition of male productivity, and that gives them uh, uh, the whole that they want to be destructive. Then that all falls from here. But she also gives an example of the pygmies, because her idea is to not make it a very universal or a strict sense. In a very strict sense, she also gives examples of pygmies according to whom um, the pygmies seem to be extremely peaceful people who know neither war nor quarrels or witchcraft. Also, their hunting expeditions are not aggressive affairs. As I said, that man started their domination with animals by hunting them, by domesticating them, and later by impregnating. And then they realized that, force they can actually control women's sexuality and women's reproductive rights and everything. And that's how the whole system of domination started. It started with animals. What she goes on saying is that there are examples where, yes, we have to kill animals to feed ourselves, but then they also peacefully exist. We will do till the point it is necessary, and we will not exceed that domination. But that didn't happen in every society. And then she moves on from pygmies. She says that it was the pastoralists who first established patriarchal relations between men and women, and that is something which sustained most part of the society, of the world. She summarizes by saying that social paradigm of the predatory hunter warrior who, without producing himself, is able by means of arms to appropriate and subordinate other products, their productive forces and their products. Next feminist scholar is Gerda Lerner, according to whom she has argued against single cause theories and against looking for one historical moment when patriarchy was established. According to her, it took over 2,500 years for patriarchy as a system to develop and establish. So again, she also reinforces the point that if it has a beginning, then it can also be ended by historical process, and she has to understand the historical process by which it becomes established and institutionalized. So we need to understand that what led to the establishment and institutionalization of the system called patriarchy. And she gives 9 pointers which can be read, I believe, because I cannot summarize 9 points. They're all very crisply written, and every point has a value. Then she talks about patriarchy and its origin in South Asia, and she mostly mentions. She talks about she goes on to say that in India, the issues patriarchy has to take into account the related issues of gender, caste, and class. And then she talks about Uma Chakravarti, who also argues that caste and gender hierarchies were the organizing principles of the Brahminical social order. So there are 3 points that can be mentioned. First device. So there are 3 different devices, and at 3 different levels that this whole mechanism of control of men over women happened. So the first one was ideology, and by ideology, she meant which was internalized by women as pativrata or wifely fidelity, whereby women accepted and even aspired to chastity and wifely fidelity as the highest expression of their selfhood. The second device was law and custom as prescribed by Brahminical social code to keep deviant women under patriarchal control. The third device was the state itself. So ultimately, it was the overarching support of the early state that provided for the firm establishment of patriarchy as an actuality and not merely as a mythology. So to say that patriarchy is not just an ideology, but rather it is a system that she gives importance to the state in reinforcing that, and hence when she says that 3 different levels, to me I understood it in this way. And she also says that historically India did not see patriarchy. There were equality, and we see that women, we had female we have goddesses who were prayed, but then that was replaced by male dominant. We replaced goddesses by gods, and the whole system is actually degrading now. Like Indian, if we talk only about Indian society, the whole sati system came in, and domestic. So everything is degrading now. Historically, it wasn't the case in India, and that's what Uma Chakravarti says. She also says that wifehood, not motherhood, has been the dominant. Again, taking cue from Hartman, comparing it with her, she also brought in the whole wifehood argument. So she says that wifehood, not motherhood, has been the dominant strand of mythology intended to mold feminine identity in India, and it was through such models that the sexuality of women was contained within legitimate boundaries. And Bhasin has constantly compared Uma Chakravarti's views with Gerda Lerner, and it is very important to read those 9 points given by Gerda Lerner to understand both the theories. So Uma Chakravarti believes that patriarchy has been a system of benevolent paternalism, in which obedient women were accorded certain rights and privileges and security. Again, the whole protection by men, the privileges that the class privilege, if we talk about I think the term benevolent paternalism defines it perfectly, because we are having certain rights and privileges under the whole paternalistic system, and that is also that kind of defines patriarchy in some way. Then she talks about the last theorist is Gail Umwet, who is not Indian but has been living and working in India for almost 2 decades, and I think now 4 decades. I'm not sure, I didn't research about her. So she talks about that earliest human societies were either local bands or gentlest foraging societies. So she is talking about Paleolithic and pre-Paleolithic periods. She goes into the whole historical distinction, that when there was no state, no class, no gender societies. So she says that society is male, state power, state exploitation may be male, but non-state, non-class, and non-gender societies are possible. They have existed and they will exist again. So again, the whole argument is drawn from the fact that historically this wasn't so, and she mentions about the Paleolithic and post-Paleolithic periods, but it changed in Neolithic period, and the whole kinship societies and everything that she and that not that also in that period also there was egalitarianism according to her, but things started changing after that, where male control over female fertility, sexuality, and labor power became more dominant. And then in conclusion, she says that both patriarchy and class oppression are important, are related to, and in most cases reinforce each other, and that women have to simultaneously challenge the system of patriarchy and class domination. And then she mentions that how in South Asia women are taking such steps, and they are coming out, and to whom we generally tag as feminists, but the discussion is happening.
So you want me to clap? Everybody should be clapping for Manya. She's done a fantastic job.
Yes,
She's done a real good job. And Manya, you cannot come on you?
Ma'am, if you give me 2 minutes, because I'm using my phone, because if I connect with my laptop, so it's not very audible, because that was the problem I was facing. But I need 2 minutes to come on video.
Yeah, no, because for me, my thoughts are that she said, as far as the article is concerned, the Kamala Bhasin's book is concerned, patriarchy, it's all there. And she was saying, should I do a detail or should I do a summary? If this was summary, I would want to someday hear the detail also from Manya. It was very comprehensive, except that you didn't list out those 9 points, and that's okay. You had covered almost everything from there. And for me now, the questions for the others is that, I mean, is the reading clear? Because what we want to do is that take the framework from Kamala Bhasin when she says that these are the indicators of patriarchy. In that light, use that reading, that indicators of patriarchy, what are the indicators, and that how every institution which is controlled by men. So men control those areas of decision making, and then what the first part is what men control, and then how all the institutions are controlled by men. So we want to examine. Manya, very well done. Really, very
Thank you,
well.
ma'am.
I'm very happy with your presentation. I've never spent so much time in the class explaining this reading earlier, and I think it was just fantastic. So you took notes. Or you are reading from your notes.
Ma'am, actually, it was a 3-step process. I marked on the PDF, then I made notes in a rough notebook, and then I finally made notes in the notebook which I wanted to refer, and I also wrote the introduction part that I was reading out because I wanted it to start very structurally, and I got that from Kamla Vaseem because I found this article very, very, very systematic, which I really take as a personal inspiration.
No, I really think it's, because she has actually given us everything you require to know about the concept called patriarchy. And
Yes.
if we understand that well, and using that framework, then we can analyze any structure. So for me, looking at Mahabharata, we know it for a patriarchal society. So what are the incidences you find? What are the instances, characters you find are reflecting which part of the patriarchal structure, which Kamla Vaseem has laid out for us. So what is it that in this episode that we have seen, we can find that where in how many ways it is reflected. Of course, there's no two views about it that Mahabharata is set in a patriarchal structure. So saying that is one thing, but then to identify in how many ways it has been reflected, and what has been this, whether women, what mark were they making, what were they doing in the patriarchal structure. Because it's not that they are completely powerless, which Kamla Vaseem also says. Patriarchy does not mean they're completely powerless, but what are the small spaces in which they are making their presence felt or their presence is being denied? So that may be one way to connect Kamla Vaseem to what we are doing in terms of looking at Mahabharata from gender perspective. Before we move on to the episodes, anyone else who has a question or, okay, Sneh has her hand up. Yes, Sneh.
Ma'am, although Manya has beautifully explained the article, but when I was reading it, I was not able to understand the two views. Kamla Vaseem talks about the traditional view and the radical approach towards feminism. Now, in traditional, she says that it is inherently there that males are superior and females are inferior. In radical, she goes on to say it's because of the biological makeup that they have, that woman would be inferior and male would be superior, and if that is the case, then there is no way to overcome that effect. So I was not able to understand these two theories. If you could just explain them, traditional and radical.
Anushka also has her hand up.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question where I read a sentence which said about the reproductive, the control over the reproduction and everything. They said in Europe, when the population was very low, the women were incentivized by giving longer maternity benefits and all these things. I had a question: how could this be a control? Because only women can reproduce, right? So is it would this be called as a control? Because if the population is low, they're only being incentivized by giving such benefits and everything. Would this be considered as a control? I was little doubtful about this one. So I wanted you to shed a light on this one.
What do the other think?
Now, I think through this incentivization that Anushka just talked about, it is basically controlling the reproductive rights of females, because uh, if you are incentivizing in a manner that you are asking women to reproduce more, so you are basically creating an environment where you will be rewarded if you reproduce more children. And that environment basically affects the reproductive choices of women and the people around her, the people that she's associated with. So that liberating feeling, or that space that is provided by the state is basically indirectly controlling the reproductive choices of women, in my opinion.
No, but Jatin, it's not controlling. As in incentivizing could be said to be facilitating maybe and not controlling as such.
But
But
however, if you
incentivizing,
sorry,
yes,
sorry, go on.
And
I
also
believe the
looking at this one, and looking at this one that females only can reproduce, right? So probably where there is the situation where the population is really low and you are facilitating the maternity benefits and everything, would that be considered as control?
I believe that would be considered control because, see, I think if you are going to place some reward on your on the reproductive choices that being a woman that you have, it is going to affect, let's say, a family as an institution. It's going to affect the familiar forces. It is going to, create some some kind of ups and downs in the family structure. Also, you are not going to be valued if you are not reproducing much, because for economy and for the state, you need some more subjects, and hence there will be a reward if you are providing more subjects to the states by reproducing. So I believe the agency of women is repressed a little, because
Yeah, I think what Anushka is wondering about the use of the word control. So, in the normal sense, when we use the word control, we are using it in terms of restricting. And she believes that if the women are given incentive to do more, it's not restriction. But Anushka, if you see in that sense that controlling, restricting choices mean either to go for it or not to go for it. But when you provide incentives, you are putting, you're making them make a choice which they would not have made otherwise. So maybe the control word is not in the general sense we use it, but it still is saying that it is going to affect the woman's choice of doing or not doing anything, and that's a control. That my action will determine what you will do. So that's my sense of the manner in which the word control has been used in this scenario. Sneh had her hand up again.
Ma'am, I just wanted to make a point in this question that has been raised by Anushka ma'am, and that's that the article where it refers to longer maternity leave, it also talks about longer paternity leave. So it's basically incentivizing both the parties, the father and the male, the husband and the wife both. And then male can obviously exercise his control to kind of force or compel the wife to get
And
pregnant,
what
because
I'm
there's
also
also a reference.
Germany, I mean, for example, in Germany, not only they were giving it was not limited only to maternity leave, it was also free schooling for children, better accommodation for them. So there were a lot of family incentives also available. So if you have got in Germany, I think you got 3 or more children, lots of free things are available to that family. So as a whole, so certainly it is persuading everybody to do that. But in any case, because the ultimate pregnancy has to be on women, the impact will be on the women's bodies, not on anybody else's bodies. So that's where influencing women's choices, because of that, is the point that is being made there. So coming back to Sneh's point about the distinction, when we read Maura Gatens, she gave us lots of psychological theories about how the female body has been constructed, and that's what the traditionalist position has been. That the female body by itself is subordinate, is less developed, and therefore it's natural for women to be subordinated. But when you look at the radical, they are accepting that they are subordinated because of the reproductive capacity, but that capacity automatically does not make them subordinate. It is the relationship of decision making. How many children will you have? What will be the gap? So even though it is her body which will produce, but those decisions are not hers. So the traditionalists are saying that the female human body is inferior. And therefore, women are inferior and therefore they have to be subordinated. In contrast, the radical is not saying that the body itself has got any, one body is better than the other. They're not saying that. They're only saying that the manner in which we relate to that body, that control that body, once we have provided control over the female body to the male, then that relationship determines the subordination, not the body. Got the difference, Nay?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I got it.
And so it is not, they're not saying that the body is inferior. They're saying the relationship to that body makes it inferior. So there's nothing inherently wrong with the female body, but it is the inherent capacity of the female body to produce, which makes the men take control over her bodies. And that's
Okay,
that's what leads to subordination, not the biological body itself. So she's not saying that the sex is gendered. She's only saying the relationship is gendered. The radical.
Okay.
Any other questions?